Second. We are now recording this session, so if you don't wish to be shown or you don't feel comfortable, please feel free to turn your camera off. With that, I would like to invite Sister Anne-Marie Quinn, who is the Executive Director for the International Presentation Association, to welcome you all and introduce this webinar. She's joining us from Ireland. Anne-Marie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Despina. Thank you. And I'm delighted to welcome each of you joining us from across the world to this, our second research publication, titled Policies for Gender Justice, Practices in Addressing Domestic Violence and Gender Stereotypes. It is important to collect data on the responses of organizations to gender stereotypes and domestic violence to identify cross-cultural experiences of gender-based violence policies. It's also most essential to identify existing or potential partnerships between governments and NGOs. And IPA's research was conducted in India, United States, and Zimbabwe. Our publication illustrates and analyzes policies within each of the three countries to create a broad understanding of how gender stereotypes and domestic violence is being addressed on a global scale. We are indeed indebted to the many individuals and organizations that supported and contributed to the publication. Our deep gratitude to those who participated in the research and shared their experiences. And we will be hearing, as Despina mentioned, to 3 of the 21 research participants during our Zoom today. I'm greatly indebted to IPA's research fellow, Ella Rayment, who conducted this very valuable and important research piece. And we look forward to hearing from Ella shortly. My deep gratitude also to our IPA NGO representative at the United Nations, Dr. Despina Aphrodite Malaki, who supervised the research project. And Despina works tirelessly in advocating at the UN on our IPA advocacy focus, elimination of violence against women and children. So once again, we're delighted to see so many co-workers and colleagues from across the world with us today. So Despina, I now hand back to you as our moderator for this event. Thank you, Despina.
Thank you, Anne-Marie, for your welcome and introductory remarks. So with that, I'm going to welcome our first speaker of the day, Ella Rayment, our IPA Research Fellow. Ella was awarded a distinction in her master's degree in International Social Development and has an undergraduate degree in International Development and Geography with first-class honors at the University of East Anglia. And unfortunately, Ella today has some internet issues, so I will be sharing a video recording of her and her work. Just give me 1 second. Unfortunately, these things happen, and she's really apologizing for that. So just okay, here is her video sent to me this morning, and okay.
Fellow for the International Presentation Association. Under the supervision of Dr. Despina Malaki, I conducted a research project titled Policies for Gender Justice, Practices in Addressing Domestic Violence and Gender Stereotypes. This research further develops the IPA's previous publication about the relationship between gender stereotypes and domestic violence. You can find both of the publications on the International Presentation Association's website. A link to both publications will be shared at the end of this presentation and in the chat. The aim of this research project was to examine policy responses by governments and NGOs to gender stereotypes and domestic violence against women before, during, and after the pandemic. Additionally, we were interested in examining the short-term and long-term impacts of best practices of policies addressing gender stereotypes and domestic violence. Ultimately, we aim to identify whether there is coherence between policy responses by governments and non-governmental organizations. This project used both primary and secondary forms of research, including the use of semi-structured interviews with the relevant experts and officials. Through this data collection, the publication presents case studies to spotlight the work of specific organizations alongside policy recommendations. The primary data collection was supplemented by an analysis of the country's national framework and NGO frameworks to understand the policies in greater contextual detail. So the following slides will summarize some of the key findings from this research. So of the data collected from India, 3 key points emerged, including the need for NGOs to provide legal advice and basic provisions for survivors navigating the court system at the grassroots level, to implement strategies outlined in the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act within rural areas of India. NGOs design and implement policies to raise awareness of gender stereotypes and domestic violence. These initiatives occur in schools, communities, and villages, whereby NGOs are supported by local governments and school administration by providing resources or access to people to undertake campaigns or workshops. And both NGOs and Indian government initiatives exist to promote employment opportunities and vocational skill training for women in India. These initiatives aim to increase economic independence for women to create greater opportunities in society for independence. From the context of the United States, the 3 key themes that emerged includes the collaboration between NGOs and government or state agencies to provide training to address issues of gender stereotypes and domestic violence. This strategy to promote training is outlined within the Violence Against Women Act. Funding from the state and federal governments is fundamental for some NGOs to develop and implement policies to address gender stereotypes and domestic violence. To ensure that funding is used in the most effective way, there should be greater freedom for NGOs to determine how to use the funds to best support their beneficiaries. Whilst the 2021 US National Strategy on Gender Equity and Equality outlines the need to improve access to healthcare, health and reproductive support is strained across the United States. NGOs have been shown to work with healthcare professionals to increase the quality of care given. As abortion rights are determined by individual states, this undermines the coherence of the US national strategy and NGOs implementing health and reproductive policies. The 3 key themes that emerge from Zimbabwe includes how the national gender-based violence strategy outlines that economic conditions in Zimbabwe make it difficult for the government to invest in addressing gender stereotypes and domestic violence. Therefore, some NGOs are reliant on private funding for their work rather than direct financial support from the national government. At the same time, NGOs promote gender-focused workshops and events in villages aiming to address issues of gender norms and gender-based violence at a community level. To address gender stereotypes and domestic violence at a grassroots level, both government agencies and NGOs emphasize the need to work with traditional and religious leaders in their campaigns. And child marriages remain an issue in Zimbabwe, as recognized in the National Action Plan and Communication Strategy on Ending Child Marriage. In line with this government strategy, NGOs advocate for legislative changes to prohibit child marriages and to support those who have been subjected to underage marriage. In order to reduce rates of child marriages, there needs to be concerted efforts by both the government and the NGOs to address the driving factors causing child marriages and achieve structural changes at different levels in society. In light of the data collection and testimonies, we developed recommendations for how to effectively address domestic violence and gender stereotypes. These include raising awareness through education, as education is a vehicle of transformation at a local and global level, building civil society networks to share resources, guidance, and to advocate, implementing survivor-centered policies so that all support that is provided is tailored to those in need, establishing partnerships with other stakeholders, including private and public organizations at global and national levels, working with men and boys in preventative work to transform attitudes to domestic violence and gender stereotypes. Our testimonies illustrated how each country faced specific challenges relevant to their local context. This ranged from challenges of dowry being prominent in Indian society and the need to value the girl child, barriers to funding in the United States, and insecure health and reproductive rights, to issues of child marriage in Zimbabwe. Our research indicated that there is general cohesion between the strategies national governments develop and the policies developed by NGOs. Often, the implementation of these government strategies rely on NGOs' involvement in training and enabling those undertaking the policies or programs. The degree of coherence varies across countries and for the specific topic or issue at stake. Across the testimonies for this research, NGOs presented both the innovations and the challenges that they faced in implementing policies under the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. The short-term innovations that emerged across the country case studies ranged from providing direct service provision of basic goods for survivors to implementing digital campaigns to raise awareness of gender stereotypes and domestic violence during the pandemic. Our testimonies illustrated how partnerships were formed with other NGOs, private organizations, and governments in order to design and implement policies at state and community levels. I have briefly presented a summary of the research publication, and you can find the full publication at globalpress.org. If you have any questions, please contact me on the email address on screen. I look forward to hearing from some of the individuals who participated in this research. Thank you. My name is Ella Rayment, and I am a research fellow for the International Presentation.
Okay, sorry about that. Let me share with you the link for the publication in the chat box in case you want to view it after our event. And I really thank Ella for her wonderful presentation. And I know that she wanted to present to you live online, but that wasn't feasible. As I'm sorry, as she mentioned, the current IPA publication, sorry, just my throat, places a focus on policy responses and it explores synergies and collaboration between governments and civil society organizations that address domestic violence and gender stereotypes. It is most essential to identify existing or potential partnerships between governments and NGOs, because achieving coherence from the two sides constitutes the only viable path to increase the effectiveness of their policies towards addressing gender stereotypes and domestic violence, and ensuring that the individuals in need are not left behind. So with that, I would like now to move on and present to you our first speaker, Dr. Sharma Deepak, the Chief Executive Officer of Rajasthan Samaggra Kalyan Sansthan in India. I hope I pronounced that correctly, and I apologize if I didn't. Also known as RSKS, a leading organization in social welfare work. Dr. Sharma started his social work in 1998 at the age of 16 years, and with dedication actually to work for a healthy, educated, and self-reliant community. RSKS, with Dr. Sharma as its leader, has won more than 100 domestic, national, and international awards. And this organization supports rural and marginalized women and girls with a goal to reach and benefit 1 million women and girls until 2030. Welcome, Dr. Sharma. Dr. Sharma will be speaking in Hindu, but at the same time, we will have his communication manager do the translation for him. Thank you both for joining our panel. It is our pleasure having you here. Dr. Sharma, based on your work and expertise, what role does education play in addressing gender stereotypes, such as reducing the stigma of the girl child in India?
Thank you, Jasmina. Thank you, everyone. हम लोग जब जेंडर इक्वलिटी का अगर बात करते हैं होल वर्ल्ड के संदर्भ में, मानव सभ्यता के संदर्भ में, तो हमेशा जेंडर इक्वलिटी के जो केंद्र है, उसका सेंटर है, उसमें विमेन्स एंड गर्ल्स आती है.
Whenever we talk about gender-related issues in the whole world, then the core or the center point would be always the women and girls.
क्योंकि पूरे वर्ल्ड के अंदर ही हम लोग देखते हैं कि मानसिकता है, जो हमारा माइंडसेट है, वो इस तरह के चेंज हो चुका है कि हम जब भी जेंडर इक्वलिटी का बात करेंगे तो उसके केंद्र में हम विमेन्स और बालिका को ही देखेंगे, मींस फीमेल्स.
Because we see in the whole world that whenever we talk about gender equality, then the first thing which comes to our mind is always the girls and women.
किसी काबिल ने कहा कि जेंडर इक्वलिटी नॉट से वीमेन इशू, दिस इज ए ह्यूमन इशू.
Someone very well said that gender equality is not a human issue, not a female issue, it's a human issue.
RSKS इंडिया 1992 से विमेन डिफरेंट फोकस एरिया पे काम कर रहे हैं. हम लोग कोर फोकस एरिया हम लोग का विमेन एम्पावरमेंट, सस्टेनेबल लाइवलीहुड एंड गर्ल्स एजुकेशन है. और मेरे लिए बहुत ही खुशी की बात है कि जो जेंडर बेस्ड वायलेंस है उसको लेके हम लोग हर वॉइस नाम से एक कैंपेन है हमारा, जो कि हम लोग बहुत समय से उसको रन कर रहे हैं. और उसके माध्यम से हम लोग देखेंगे तो हजारों लाखों वीमेन्स को, बालिकाओं को, मेंस को, बॉयज को हम लोगों ने अवेयर किया है.
RSKS India is working in the rural villages from the year 1992, and our core focus areas in which we are working are the sustainable livelihood, women empowerment, and girls education. Until now, we have supported millions of girls and rural women through our different projects.
हम लोग जब ग्राउंड लेवल पे देखते हैं तो जो हम लोग वर्क कर रहे हैं, इतने वर्षों से हम लोग जो प्रयास कर रहे हैं, मेहनत कर रहे हैं, तो उसके जो अच्छे इम्पैक्ट है वो भी हम लोग ग्राउंड पे मेजर करते हैं.
Whenever we look back at our work which we are doing at the ground level from many years, we always look for the impact which our programs or which our work created.
जैसा कि बहुत समय पहले अगर हम लोग देखें 20 साल पहले के पक्ष में हम लोग जाते हैं तो जो जेंडर भेदभाव है वो तो ऑब्वियसली बात है, सभी जगह है. बट अभी जब हम देखते हैं जो हमारा वर्किंग एरिया है, वहां पर अगर बालिका का जन्म होता है तो वहां पर थाली बजा के खुशी मनाई जाती है.
Like whenever we talk about gender issues like 20 years back, then there were so many problems. But when we are talking about right now and the areas in which we are working, the gender issues are not that much, because the girl child birth, the birth of the girl child is being celebrated by playing noise with the utensils.
तो जो युवा लोग है, एडोलेसेंट है, वो जब सेलिब्रेट करते हैं विलेजेस के अंदर डिफरेंट लोकेशन पे, तो इसमें कहीं ना कहीं एजुकेशन और अवेयरनेस का बहुत बड़ा कंट्रीब्यूशन है.
So when the adolescent children, whether it be boys or girls living in the rural areas, they celebrate the birth of the girl child. So this is due to the education which they have got.
हम लोगों के पास एक छोटा सा, जैसा कि मैंने बताया, हमारा कोर फोकस एरिया गर्ल्स एजुकेशन, तो एक छोटा सा उसका पावर पॉइंट है, वो मैं आपके साथ शेयर करना चाहूंगा.
Like what we told earlier, that our core focus area is education. So we would be sharing a PPT with you all, so to have a look at.
Dr. Sharma, you're muted.
Yes. So hello everybody. Let's change the world through the weapon of education. So view about RSKS India, Rajasthan Samagra Kalyan Sansthan is a grassroots Indian non-profit voluntary organization situated at Ajmer, or district of Rajasthan. So we started our organization in 1992, and the young group people started this organization, and we are promoting the women empowerment, sustainable livelihood, and the girls' education in the rural and slum areas. So this is our mission, that RSKS India help elevate illiteracy, poverty, violence against women, social levels by facilitating empowerment of women and girls from deprived and marginalized communities. Our vision is that attainment of healthy, educate, and self-reliant community through a process of nurturing sustainable livelihood, solidarity, and peace. Our goal is that 1 million women and girls of marginalized section may get graceful life, better livelihood, and self-reliance education. RSKS India works in rural areas of Ajmer, Rajasthan. Our education models which are benefiting at the rural areas are education for every girls, Pathshala school, Gurukul school, and Udan school, which would see further. Education for every girl child project provides education stuff as well as hygiene stuff to minimum of 1,000 girls every year. Along with this, social events, awareness workshops, and activities are also conducted. Pathshala schools are to provide value-based education and skill training to 10 to 19 years old rural girls of Ajmer. Along with this, mental and physical health awareness classes are also organized for these girls. Udan schools are providing middle level education to the school dropout women so that they could also know about their surroundings in better way. Gurukul school provides education to the slum and street children and also enrolls them to the mainstream of education so that they could also have a chance to change their lives. Education models are changing the mindset of the society and is helping in resolving the gender stereotypes. Benefits of this education models is a step forwards towards achieving gender equality. Change in the mindset of the rural community is seen for the girl child education. Girls will have equal opportunities to get higher education. Being educated, the marginalized and deprived students will lay the foundation of development, and this will be helping in progress of their region and village. Educated children would be helpful to illiterate parents. Literacy rate of girl children would be increased, and girl will be able to regular study without any problem. The achievements so far which we have achieved through our different programs are like 1,100 rural women got middle level education through our Udan school. 21,500 women and girls were made aware on the issues of legal rights, child marriage, domestic violence, dowry, gender-based violence, etc. 9,800 women were made financially literate. Habit change of girls and women was done through 7,80,000 sanitary napkins and thousands of workshops done at the rural areas. 2,500 girls got regular at schools and passed away from our Pathshala schools. More than 500 slum and street children have got quality education through the Gurukul schools. More than 300 slum and street children were enrolled in the schools, and more than 45,000 rural intelligent girls got benefit of education stuff and hygiene stuff through Education for Every Girl's Child project. Our education models changed her life and gave her path to a remarkable future.
एक छोटा सा एक स्टोरी है, ये नोमोडिक बालिका है, जुगी बस्ती में रहती है, स्लम में, रानी नाम है इसका.
This is a small story of a girl named Rani who lives in a slum village.
कि जब हम बात कर रहे थे कि किस तरीके से जो शिक्षा है उसका योगदान है, उसका कंट्रीब्यूशन है, जो हमारा बालिका कलंक है, उसको किस तरीके से हम कम कर सकते हैं, कैसे माइंडसेट चेंज कर सकते हैं.
When we were talking about like how the education would help in this gender stereotypes, then this is a story.
सन 2018 के अंदर हम लोगों का मॉडल से जो पाठशाला मॉडल जिसके बारे में हमने बताया, वो अजमेर डिस्ट्रिक्ट में छोटा सा एक गांव है, विलेज गुगरा, वहां पर रनिंग में था. उसके पास पे झुग्गी बस्ती है जहाँ की ये बालिका है.
In year 2018, we started our one school Pathshala in a rural village named Gugra. And nearby it, this was the slum from where this girl belonged.
इनका जो कम्युनिटी है नोमैडिक और स्लम डेवलपर्स, वहाँ पर जो बालिका शिक्षा है उसको बहुत ही कमतर आंका जाता है, उसको बहुत अच्छा नहीं माना जाता.
As she lives in slums and in her community, girl child education is not considered so much.
और मैं बात करूँ तो मैक्सिमम जो बालिका है वो सभी अशिक्षित है.
And if we talk about the girls living in those slums, then most of the girls are uneducated.
इस बालिका की हम बात करते हैं तो 2018 में जब हमारा टीम इससे मिला तो कचरा बीनने का काम है, घर के घरेलू काम है, बकरी चराने का काम है, ये इनके काम थे.
When we talk about this girl in year 2018, when we reached the house of this girl, then her work was collecting garbage or doing some other stuff at the people's home.
इसने बताया कि हमारी टीम को कि मुझे पढ़ने में रुचि है और मैं पढ़ना चाहती हूँ, बट इनका जो परिवार है उन्होंने मना किया, वो इसकी शिक्षा के खिलाफ थे.
She when our team reached her and we asked her that do you want education, then she said that yes, she is interested in education, but her family is against it.
हम लोगों ने 3 महीने का इनके साथ में काउंसलिंग किया परिवार के साथ में, और इनकी मदर एग्री हो गई इनको स्कूल भेजने के लिए.
Then we tried consultations for 3 months regularly, and then her mother agreed to her education.
उसके बाद रेगुलर पाठशाला में आई. 2020 में इसने पाठशाला से ग्रेजुएट किया.
And then she came regularly at the Pathshala schools of our, and in year 2020 she passed from our school.
जब हम पाठशाला में इसको एजुकेट कर रहे थे तो इन बच्चों के साथ में मिनिस्ट्री में एजुकेशन से उनका जुड़ाव, जेंडर इशू पे बात करना, जो हमारे समाज में सोशल लेवल से है उसके बारे में बात करना, डिसिप्लिन के बारे में बात करना, स्पोर्ट्स एक्टिविटी है, लाइफ स्किल है, उसके बारे में हम लोगों ने इनके साथ में अवेयरनेस के और टीचिंग के सेशन किए.
When we were teaching her at the Pathshala school, then the normal education was also considered, and along with that, gender stereotypes, the social labels, sports activities, disciplines, yoga, and other value-based education was also given to her.
जब आज हम देखते हैं, जब ये ग्रेजुएट हो गई तो अभी ये सेकेंडरी क्लास में पढ़ रही है, और जब इनकी बस्ती में हम जाते हैं, जो उनका झुग्गी बस्ती है, स्लम्स है, वहां पर तो जो मेंस है, जिसको हम कह सकते हैं पॉजिटिव फादरहुड, तो मेंस है, मेंस का पूरा जो माइंडसेट है पूरा चेंज हुआ है. वहाँ के जो लोकल लोग हैं उनका पूरा माइंडसेट चेंज हुआ है.
Now she is studying at the secondary school, and she is going regularly at the schools, and the men and the boys living at her slum, the mentality of those boys and men have been changed because of this positive attitude.
इस बालिका की शिक्षा को देख के, इसके इम्प्रूवमेंट को देख के, ग्राउंड लेवल पे इम्पैक्ट को देख के, बाकी जो कम्युनिटी के परिवार है जो बालिकाओं की शिक्षा के खिलाफ थे, वो भी अपनी बालिकाओं को स्कूल भेजने के लिए प्रेरित कर रहे हैं.
When the girls and the other families living at that slum saw this girl getting study and getting education and going regularly at school, they also started sending their girl children to the schools.
नेल्सन मंडेला ने कहा भी है कि जो शिक्षा है वो बहुत ही पावरफुल वेपन है जिससे हम दुनिया को बदल सकते हैं.
Nelson Mandela said once that the education is such a powerful weapon that through it we can change the world.
जेंडर को आराम से चेंज कर सकते हैं.
And we can change the gender easily through it. So thank you.
थैंक यू. ये एक छोटा सा स्टोरीज है हम लोगों का, और ऐसे डिफरेंट मोर देन 1000 स्टोरीज है हमारे पास में, जिस स्टोरीज के थ्रू जेंडर्स में उनका मानसिकता में चेंज हुआ है ना, और हमें उम्मीद है आने वाले समय के अंदर हम और भी बेहतर कर सकते हैं समाज में.
So this was just a short story, and there are more than 1000 stories which we have right now through our different programs, and through this we could surely change the mindset of the people on the gender stereotypes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma. Thank you so much for your insightful presentation. Education on gender equality and women's and girls' rights are indeed crucial starting points in transforming prevailing discriminatory gender norms. I would like to reemphasize especially what you said and keep that, among other things, that gender equality is not a women issue, it's a human issue. And as we have also identified in our publication, it is essential to teach children their rights at a young age as part of their school curriculum. within a system where the girl child is traditionally seen as a burden, we strongly emphasize the need to change these patriarchal attitudes to address gender stereotypes and justifications of domestic violence through formal and informal education and relevant learning activities. Thank you again. So now it is my pleasure to introduce to you our next speaker, Mrs. Rebecca Cline, who is the Director of Prevention Programs for the Ohio Domestic Violence Network. Rebecca, apart from overseeing relevant activities, also provides training and technical assistance about domestic violence. Let me remove that. She is the 2014 Ohio Chapter National Association of Social Workers Lifetime Achievement Award recipient, and she's directly accountable for the Delta Project, a local, statewide, and national primary prevention of intimate partner violence initiative funded by the U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that she's also the founder of the Ohio Men's Action Network. And thank you for being here with us, Rebecca. We're extremely happy for having you here. And I believe you have a long time experience working in the US on domestic violence prevention, among other fields, of course. So how do you think national legislation impacts the way domestic violence or gender stereotypes are experienced?
Thank you for the question. And I'd like to thank you so much for the honor and privilege of being part of this esteemed panel today. To answer your question, national legislation authorizes the formation of organizations like mine, the Ohio Domestic Violence Network, through the Violence Against Women Act. So each US state, territory, and recognized Native American tribe is able to organize and seek federal funding for organizations such as ours. In Ohio, we have the Ohio Domestic Violence Network and also our sister organization, the Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence. Besides providing best practices to local domestic violence programs and rape crisis centers, our job really is to lead the way towards challenging gender stereotypes by reducing risk factors and increasing protective factors associated with domestic and sexual violence. National legislation also authorizes spending for domestic and sexual violence primary prevention through the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, like was mentioned. This funding is used by organizations like the Ohio Domestic Violence Network to provide prevention education about gender-based violence and to challenge harmful stereotypes that support violence and abuse. And the Ohio Men's Action Network, and I was one of many founders of that organization. That organization is a product of this funding from the Centers for Disease Control. And these are a couple ways that national legislation supports the way domestic violence and gender stereotypes are experienced in the US.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for sharing your comments. Thank you also for pointing out that it is our job to lead the way to challenging gender stereotypes and reducing risk factors and increasing protective factors associated with domestic violence. From what you shared with us, I would like to reemphasize the issue of government funding to civil society organizations. As our research identified, funding in the US is allocated to state agencies and NGOs who provide direct services concerning gender-based violence through a series of grant programs. But we must not forget, though, that NGOs need flexibility in how government funds can be spent in order to react to the needs of the populations they serve, especially during COVID, where NGOs had to work reactively to shifting operating guidelines and reduced capacity. So I would like now to invite our third speaker, Ms. Rufaro Chakanetsa, to take the floor. Rufaro currently serves as the Innovator against gender-based violence for UN Women and the Spotlight Initiative in Zimbabwe. In this role, Rufaro was featured on UN Women Africa's inaugural list of 16 outstanding women activists for co-founding Taking a Stand Against Gender-Based Violence initiative, which utilizes WhatsApp groups to form community support networks and train behavior change advocates. She's a women's rights advocate and equity and inclusion specialist with a strong passion for gender-based violence prevention through designing community-centered interventions. Thank you for being here with us today, Rufaro. It is a privilege to have you on the panel. Now, with from your perspective as a Spotlight Innovator, what role do international governmental organizations play in addressing domestic violence and gender stereotypes at the grassroots level in Zimbabwe? You are muted, Rufaro.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me, and congratulations on your launch. I'm super excited that you chose Zimbabwe as one of the countries for your study. So I think the role of international organizations is to fund innovation. International organizations in Zimbabwe have been responsible for funding innovative ideas aimed at ending gender-based violence, specifically domestic violence, which happens to be the dominant form of gender-based violence at the moment in Zimbabwe. For example, during the COVID pandemic, UN Women termed it as a shadow pandemic, which meant that domestic violence was having bad effects in the same way that COVID was affecting people. So I think international organizations, specifically UN Women and UNICEF, are responsible for movement building. By movement building, they are gathering all the national organizations and writing to them, inviting them to take part in domestic violence prevention. And specifically, the Spotlight Initiative, which works together with international organizations, had small grants which were targeting community-based organizations working on domestic violence prevention and gender stereotypes. I remember part of the proposal had to have a part which was responding to gender-based violence, and local organizations had to then train what we call community-based organizations. These are organizations functioning mainly at village level. So I think this is, the international organizations are giving power to the community members. They are funding innovations, they are lobbying for more active participation from community members, as opposed to, I remember when we started development work, most of the work was done by development workers, but now international organizations are saying we want to fund directly this community-based organizations. They are really supporting active participation from community members. Another example is UNICEF. UNICEF was training traditional leaders at village level. They were training nurses, they were training teachers, they were training people who work with people every day at village level to respond to domestic violence. And part of the trainings included how to interpret legislative policies. For example, if a village chief knows how to interpret the Domestic Violence Act to the local people, it then means you have already empowered the whole village, because this is someone whom they interact with on a daily basis. And then there's also the theme from United Nations, which says leaving no one behind. I think it also adds on to the fact that international organizations are really placing an emphasis on active participation. They are really funding participation from community-based organizations, which often receive training from local NGOs. And then I think the other role of international organizations is to hold governments accountable for the policies that they would have implemented, to see if there is actual implementation, and then to also fund research to see if there are results from the time the policies were implemented right up to from the time the policy was formulated, right through implementation. The international organizations, they also identify gaps. They might not do it directly, but also it goes back to them funding the researchers, which enable people to see and track if the policies that we have formulated are actually working. And I think for Zimbabwe specifically, the role of international organizations, really, being one of the people working for part of the funded programs, I really can feel the difference, especially at grassroots level. They are helping people to build strong movements against domestic violence. And most of the community members now, they feel like they are part of the work that's going on. They now realize that it is their responsibility to actually end domestic violence, and it is not the responsibility of women activists or development workers. And this is all through the work of international organizations. Thank you. I have also left out some few points because I feel like Ella addressed it in her summary at the start. I realized it was
That's
the
okay.
same. Yes.
Thank you, Rufaro, for your intervention, and it was so insightful and enriching. It is always very encouraging to hear about innovations and funding initiatives from intergovernmental organizations and agencies that support and strengthen the capacity of civil society at the grassroots level. As you very well stressed, international government organizations in Zimbabwe are in a better position now to demand accountability from the government. So thank you for that. We will continue now with the second round of questions, starting with you, Rufaro, this time. Following on your prior comments about the work of intergovernmental organizations, what actions do you think NGOs can take to enhance partnerships and work together with national and international organizations to address domestic violence and gender stereotypes? Rufaro, you're muted.
Sorry. I think national governmental organizations have to invest in the staff they employ. For example, they have to invest in business, in partnerships building officers. They have to invest in grant writing officers, because I feel it's a key component of the amount of funding that local NGOs will then get for the work they are doing. For example, if you are not employing as many grant officers as necessary, it means you may not have money which allows the work to be done. If you do not have partnerships development officers who are good at networking, for example, at an international level, it means the work you are doing may not necessarily be highlighted internationally. It just stays within the domestic confines. So that is one key area that I would like local NGOs to invest in. And then also joining as much international associations as possible to share best practices and to identify gaps and to see the best way forward. From the launch, I can see that some of the issues that affect Zimbabwe are also in the US. They are also in India. And I've actually learned some of the models and some of the ways in which people in India and the US are fighting domestic violence. So this is the kind of collaboration I would recommend for national governmental organizations, non-governmental organizations, sorry, and utilizing the digital space like we are doing now. If we were not on this meeting, it would have been almost impossible for us to meet in person. So yeah, I think they should also work towards that, and having vibrant social media pages. It goes a long way, especially when you're trying to reach a certain target group. For example, the young people, they use social media a lot. And if you're going to stick to in-person meetings and community meetings, you may realize that the young people may not necessarily attend. So national non-governmental organizations at national level continuously have to evolve and see what's working. I remember we used to gather people a lot, but with COVID, we actually realized that we were missing so many participants. And now we have Zoom meetings, we have WhatsApp-based platforms. And for me, that is the work that we continuously have to do and improve. And this can also be done through these platforms where we actually learn from each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Rufaro, for sharing your perspective. You have covered so much ground that I don't know where to start. I mean, I think the actions you suggested are essential for NGOs to undertake in order to ultimately be able to influence community and government policies. Adding to your points, I'm glad that you stressed inter alia the need for NGOs to join international initiatives in order to share their best practices and lessons learned. I happen to be part of a newly established international team of good practices called Praxis Bonum, where NGOs, government institutions, and other international actors can submit their good practices projects. This collection of good practices at the global and local level has been created as a resource for those interested in sharing their good practices and learning from the experiences of others, and supporting or funding certain projects around the world. I think it's something that we really must encourage and direct our organizations to, so people get inspired by other success stories. I'll give now the floor to Rebecca again. Rebecca, the COVID-19 pandemic has affected how organizations operate. As a matter of fact, emerging data has shown that all types of violence against women and girls, particularly domestic violence, have intensified, and that the world actually was unprepared to respond to this rapid escalation. What innovations did the Ohio Domestic Violence Network create as a result of the pandemic?
That's a great question. And there were many, and some of the ones that I'm most proud of are ODVN's hotel program. We were really forced to create a hotel program that works with local domestic violence programs to house survivors when there's no space available at the safe house or domestic violence shelter. This was especially important during the midst of the pandemic, when local programs were required to provide space for quarantining and social distancing in a small shelter area. So what we did was we used funding from our state and federal partners to create this hotel program that allowed shelters across the state to decongregate. Since 2002, we've housed just almost 3,100 survivors and their children in hotels across the state. where otherwise they would have had to wait for a shelter space to become available. We hope and continue to hope that we will see a reduction in fatalities in our state as a result of being able to house more survivors this way, rather than having them have to wait for shelter space. Another innovation is, just like Rufaro said, we moved all of our meetings to Zoom spaces. Zoom's our team. And where traditionally we had convened people face-to-face, quarterly, directors would come together in meetings in different regions in Ohio, we began meeting virtually monthly instead of quarterly, especially during the beginning of the pandemic until we had managed the crisis. Those virtual meetings we found were so much more accessible for people in our state and increased participation between ODVN and local domestic violence programs exponentially. People could come to meetings for an hour and a half without having to drive halfway across the state to central Ohio. And after we began convening those meetings, we also began convening meetings with local program staff who were responsible for various areas of their work. We began convening preventionists, legal advocates, and youth advocates in meetings so that we could support them in their work. Before the pandemic, one of my big challenges was trying to figure out, how do I provide statewide training and technical assistance to local programs across the state who may not have any budget at all for primary prevention? And my big lesson learned was that convening, again, for an hour a month, bringing people together, helping them think about best practice frameworks was far more effective than trying to ask people to come together for a day and travel, save them resources and much budget. We also moved all of our training programs virtually. And again, we saw an increase in participation from across the state and also from across the US. People were participating more in our training programs as a result of moving them to virtual platforms. And one of the innovations that I'm most proud of is a web page on our website that I'll drop the URL into the chat when I'm done speaking. It's called Support for Stressful Times, and it's for any individual, any organization, or any community to come to where they can access trauma-informed services, care. There's a virtual yoga studio as part of this website where ZenWorks Yoga in Cleveland, Ohio, provided us with videos of young people who are helping us to breathe and helping us to generate positive and good energy in the face of the trauma that the COVID-19 pandemic caused for us all. And so these are a few of the innovations that we produced as a result of the pandemic. And COVID-19 has certainly been both a challenge and a triumph for us at ODVN. And I again, thank you so much for the opportunity to share.
Thank you, Rebecca, for sharing those important initiatives that the Ohio Domestic Violence Network developed during the pandemic. Thank you for talking about the COVID-19 context and how your organization managed to cope with this new reality. I believe a constant monitoring and evaluation of the effectiveness of the policies are essential in order to be able to adjust to various circumstances that emerge each time. Let's continue now with my question to Dr. Sharma. Dr. Sharma, in the communities where RSKS operate, how important is to collaborate with government officials to achieve your work? Dr. Sharma?
थैंक यू देशमयी। किसी भी वर्क को ग्राउंड लेवल पे उसकी सफलता के लिए जरूरी है कि सभी लोग सॉलिडेरिटी के साथ में काम करें, और उस पे हम लोगों का बहुत ज्यादा यकीन है।
Everyone should work with solidarity at the ground level, because whenever we are working, then solidarity is very important.
राजस्थान समर कल्याण संस्थान जब ग्राउंड लेवल पे काम करता है तो हमारा कोशिश होता है कि हम लोग बेनिफिशियरी से लेके जो अपर लेवल है गवर्नमेंट ऑफिशियल, हमारे लिए वही अपर है ग्राउंड लेवल पे, क्योंकि डिसीजन मेकिंग का, पॉलिसी मेकिंग का उनके पास पावर है।
So whenever we are working at the rural level, then we try to always from the beneficiaries to the upper level. So the upper level for us at the ground level are the village administrations or the government officials.
हम लोगों का कोशिश होता है कि जब हम कोई भी कार्यक्रम डिजाइन करें, उसको इम्प्लीमेंट करें, तो उसके अंदर सभी लोगों का भागीदारी सुनिश्चित होना चाहिए।
So we always try that everyone should be included in all our workings.
तो उस संदर्भ के अंदर हम लोग जब काम करते हैं, जब 25 साल पहले जैसे मैंने ज्वाइन किया डेवलपमेंट का सेक्टर, तो शुरुआत में 500 साल का जो अनुभव था वो इस तरह का था कि जब हम जीओ की और एनजीओ की बात करते हैं, गवर्नमेंट ऑर्गेनाइजेशन एंड नॉन गवर्नमेंट ऑर्गेनाइजेशन।
So when I joined the organization 25 years back, then whenever we talk about GO or NGO, like government organization and non-government organization,
तो हम लोगों को लगा शुरुआत में 5-6 साल में कि जिस एरिया में हम लोग काम करते हैं, चाहे वो रूरल हो, ट्राइबल्स हो, लोकेशंस हो, तो वो एरिया सेम रहता है, बट जियो उसमें भूमिका निभाता है लॉइन की, और जो एनजीओस होता है वो लाइक बकरी, जैसे ऊपर उन्होंने भी कहा।
so whenever we are working in a rural area, then GO and NGO are working like NGO, government organization, is working like a lion in that area, and NGOs are working as a goat in that area.
लॉइन क्या करेगा, हमेशा बकरी को खाने का सोचेगा,
and lion will always think about eating the goat.
है ना। तो ये हम लोगों का एक्सपीरियंस था, बट अब अभी के वर्तमान के संजोरियों में देखते हैं तो जो गवर्नमेंट ऑफिशियल है, जैसे विलेज लेवल का बात करूं मैं आपको, तो विलेज ऑफिसर्स है, पटवारी है, एजुकेशन डिपार्टमेंट है, सरपंच है, जो विलेज लीडर है, या हम डिस्ट्रिक्ट लेवल की बात करें, क्योंकि हम बहुत सारे मुद्दों पे काम करते हैं, चाहे वो हम जेंडर बेस्ड वायलेंस का मुद्दा ले, चाहे हम डिसेबिलिटी का मुद्दा ले, चाहे गर्ल्स एजुकेशन का मुद्दा ले, वीमेन एम्पावरमेंट का मुद्दा ले, वीमेन हेल्थ का मुद्दा ले, तो उन सब में उनका जो रोल है बहुत ही ज्यादा महत्वपूर्ण हो जाता है।
But when we talk about the current scenario, then the role of the government officials, whether like we are working in many areas, it includes the rural areas as well as the districts. So the importance of the government officials is very important while working at those areas.
और हमारे लिए सबसे अच्छी बात ये है कि मोस्टली टाइम हमें ऐसे अच्छे या तो ऑफिशियल्स मिले हैं, या हमारा मे भी शायद काम थोड़ा सा अच्छा है कि उन लोगों का सपोर्टिंग नेचर रहे हमेशा।
But what we found out from all this was like, because it could be because of our good work, or it could be because of our like destiny, that the workings which we did and the experience which we had with the government officials was very good.
तो हम ये कह सकते हैं कि किसी भी काम की सफलता के लिए सभी का साथ होना बहुत जरूरी है, चाहे हम गवर्नमेंट ऑर्गेनाइजेशन की बात करें, चाहे नॉन गवर्नमेंट ऑर्गेनाइजेशन की बात करें, चाहे हम कम्युनिटी की बात करें, तो सभी लोगों का एक मंच पे एक साथ आना जरूरी है, तभी उस काम की सफलता सुनिश्चित हो सकती है।
So we can say that for a success of any program or any work, all the people who are involved with that work, whether it be the government officials, the organizations, or the community peoples for whom the program is developed, must come together for the success of the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma, for sharing your perspective. And as you said, solidarity is really important, and those involved need to work together in order to achieve a wishful outcome. I really appreciate the different perspectives and the feelings that all of you brought forth in your presentations. It is our hope that this study will trigger change in action, so that together we will not only declare that gender stereotypes stereotypes and violence against women are unacceptable, but also make their prevention and elimination a living reality. Before giving the floor to Sister Anne-Marie Quinn, our Executive Director, to deliver her concluding remarks, as the moderator of this discussion, I would like to extend my thanks to our amazing speakers and, of course, to all of the research participants who offered us their insights. Unfortunately, it wasn't possible to have everybody on the panel today, but I really thank you for participating in the research, and thank you to all of you who attended today, as well as to everyone who is doing work in this field. Anne-Marie, over to you for closing. Anne-Marie, you're muted.
Thank you, Despina. So I'm delighted to have a few moments to express sincere gratitude on behalf of IPA firstly to our presenters, firstly to Rebecca. Rebecca, it was so encouraging, in your presentation to hear that US national legislation authorizes the formation of organizations like Ohio Domestic Violence Network. So that's so encouraging to hear that. And that organizations like yours who embrace the challenges of COVID pandemic, which it's in such innovative ways, especially in your hotel program. And we had a few words before we began. I was so interested in that hotel program because housing and shelter are such issues at this time. Collaboration comes across from all our presenters, and indeed it is very much part of the Ohio Domestic Violence Network. So it has been an honor for us to be engaged with you, Rebecca, and with the organization, and we hope to continue our collaboration into the future. So thank you very much for being with us. Dr. Sharma, again, I was thinking of the saying, education is one of the key ways to address inequalities and inclusion. And indeed, your organization has done that in ways beyond commenting on. You mentioned in your presentation that you have that 21,000 young women have been part of your program and how you have transformed their lives. And it's lovely to come away with the story of one young woman, Rayment, I think you mentioned her name, if I'm correct, and how her life has been transformed. And in transforming her life, she has transformed the lives of those she encounters. And wonderful to hear the changed mentality of the young boys that you mentioned. So again, it has been a privilege for us in IPA to have you as a participating in this research program, and we hope to continue our collaboration in the future. So I wish you all the best for the future in your amazing work, and my thanks to your interpreter. Thank you very much. And last but not least, to Rufaro. And Rufaro, my thinking here was Zimbabwe is blessed to have you as an advocate for women. You have done so much and you're so passionate in what you do. And you have given us, through both the research in the research paper and here today, you have engaged us in the power of the international organizations supporting local organizations, and how those international organizations and local are holding the government to accountability, which is so important. And your huge emphasis on collaboration at all levels as a way to change. And also you're encouraging all non-government organizations in their work to collaborate. And I would say from my experience of the NGOs working at the UN and at other levels, that is one of the treasures that there is the huge collaboration. And I see on this webinar today so many of the UN colleagues of Despina here, and it's so encouraging. During our webinar, we would love to have been able to have the other 18 presenters who participate in the research, but time did not allow. But I would encourage all of you to, when reading the research, to see their wonderful contribution also. And I want to say we are deeply grateful to each of you. Ella Rayment, our research fellow, a very sincere word of gratitude to you, Ella. Your detailed research has produced a publication which has placed a strong focus on policies addressing domestic violence and gender stereotypes by the governments within 3 of the countries where IPA has a presence and are located and minister there: India, United States, and Africa, in Zimbabwe and Zambia. Sincere thank you, Ella. And delighted that you're here, you know, live as you can be online, but thank you for preparing the video because of the fear that your internet might go down. And last but not least, to our own IPA NGO representative at the UN, to Despina. Despina, huge thanks to you. I'm very aware of the tireless work you did in overseeing the research project and its publication. And also, all will agree, thank you for your skillful moderating of today's launch. It is beginning, there's a lot done and a lot more to do, but we are grateful for this day and for this publication, and hopefully its impact on the work going forward. So I'll hand back to you just to close the event, Despina. And again, thank you to each person in attendance. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Thank you for your kind words. I think we are now ready to close our event, and I really appreciate everybody attending and everyone participating in our research. Keep well, and hope to see you soon again soon. To see you soon in the future.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Bye.
much. Thank you. Ella, maybe you stay on. Ella, maybe you stay on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Rufaro, thank you. Lovely to meet you, Rufaro, and thank you.
Yeah, I would especially thank you.
So your internet held up, Ella.